All right, Alicia, how are you doing? Welcome back to another live Q&A. We are
Um,
officially in our home, our our once a week time, which will be Wednesday here at 10 a.m. And we are no longer going to continue with the Thursdays at noon just because there is so much going on. And well, we can cover a lot of territory in these. And I think together we're better than individually. And so this is a nice little shift that we're going to do.
yeah, I'm excited. I'm glad that we're able to focus on these. We're also focusing on our podcast, so we're getting a lot of new content out there for anybody who wants to listen to very, targeted kind of specific immigration topics, and you can get really good insight and, our anecdotes about what we deal with every day when we're slogging through the world of immigration law. And Mark's pulling up that podcast there, so that's where it is.
Yeah. So make sure that you guys, when you come to our website, this is the Canadian Immigration Institute site, but even on Holthe Immigration Law, the Holthe Law site, you can go to blog and resources, and we've got a ton of stuff on here. So if you are just listening to this for the first time and you're wondering what this live Q&A is all about, yes, we spend a lot of time answering your individual questions that you post in the comments, but there's a ton of information. We've got blog posts. We've got the Canadian Immigration Podcast. We've got our immigration community. We've got our courses, newsletter, and then, of course, right here on YouTube and all of the other locations where you guys are connecting in with us. YouTube, we like it because we can easily put all the videos. They're easily accessible and searchable. And remember, there is a really, really good search feature right here. I'll just move over till I get to it. There it is, right here within the channel itself. So if you have questions about virtually, any type of immigration, you can just search, and obviously this is a Google product, so the search feature is good, and you can find a video that covers a topic that you're probably wondering about. And so we've got tons of content. And here I was just looking. I can't remember what our number of videos is these days. And what have we got? 832 videos that we've put up over the last, 6 years or however many years we're doing. And we're going strong. But like Alicia said, the podcast is growing quickly. We're dropping episodes every week. And I just want to give a big shout out to these guys right here. I can even just pull them up here. Journey.ca. This is the sponsor of our podcast, and so we really appreciate their support. And we had a little bit of a hiatus through the summer dropping episodes, but we want to let everybody know about them and the good work that they do. And Alicia, I just had a consult with an individual 2 days ago who got their self-employed PR application rejected. They followed the instructions, they did what they thought they were supposed to do, but what they did not include was a business plan. And that is a critical component to what Journey does. And we love the work they do, and they're a great supporter of our channel. And so we appreciate you, Journey. And if you need if you fit into any of these categories, if you're an immigration consultant, a lawyer, an applicant yourself, and they do other things. They've got startups. They help startups achieve their business goals through, crafting documents and strategic advice, and also M&A firms. So there's lots of different tools and resources, and they go both ways, Canada, US. They help with both sides, so definitely go check them out. So thank you, Journey. All right. Well, Alicia, rounds of invitations. So as we scroll through here and we look, today is Wednesday, October the 4th. There was a draw. It was an agri-food one. Was the last category-based draw, September the 28th. We haven't seen anything this week yet. What are your views on this whole world of express entry here, given the last rounds of invitations, and that we've had another French language one?
hmm Yeah, and I was talking to clients or family members of clients who were looking at this and saying, "Do I have a hope?" Right? And these people happen to be on the healthcare list, and so they've got lots of work, but they're getting into their later 30s and they're approaching 40, and they're worried about whether they're going to have enough CRS points. And I said, "Well, you know what? Like, it is now possible because of these targeted draws that even though you thought, maybe a 450 or a 480 is not going to give you an invitation to apply, now with these category-based draws, you might have a chance." And so Now more than ever, it's important to make sure you're meeting those minimum eligibility requirements properly, that you have properly put in your work experience, that you are properly putting in the right national occupation classification code. Because if you're fudging things and if you're looking at those targeted lists and saying, oh, yeah, that job that I had, I'm sure I can claim that I was working in one of those categories, you're going to face issues down the line because, of course, you have to justify any period of work that you've claimed for points, and that's going to qualify you for getting those points for either federal skilled worker or CEC work experience. You've got to be able to back that up with letters of employment from your employer, tax stubs, other documentation to prove you actually worked at the job you said for the wage that you should be getting. So make sure you put in your express entry profile. You might have a shot at it. And hopefully these category-based draws, I would love for them to be a little bit more predictable. But right now it's going to give people who might not have had a chance, depending on what IRCC does.
Yes. All right. Well, let's get some shout outs here to some people that are connecting in. And if this is your first time, please let us know where in the world you're listening from. And we love to give a few shout outs, and we appreciate all of you, because without your questions, there would be not much for Alicia and I to talk about. Well, actually, we've got a ton to talk about, but questions that if you guys are asking, we know that there's probably 1,000 other people that are also asking those questions. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do so. If you're watching on Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever you are catching this live stream, please give us a shout out. We love to see how far this reach is going. And the more we can, the more questions we can answer, we know the more people can help. Okay, let's see what we've got here. Oh, Sheeta. All right. Hey, Mark and Alicia, good to see you. Wanted to let you know I finally got my PR. That is fantastic. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate you letting us know. We can then basically celebrate together. So let's give a little bit of applause here now that I got the audio sorted out here. Let's see. There we go. Now we're in business. So congratulations, Sheeta. That is awesome. We've got Henry tuning in from Nigeria. Awesome. Love to have you, Henry. Thanks for connecting. We've got Olusin. Hey, Mark and Alicia, joining from Ottawa, the city of power. Well, yeah, yep, there's no doubt. The capital city of Canada has a little bit of power there for sure. We've got Galawango, Robert. He says, hi, Mark and Alicia, glad to hear from you. Well, we're glad to have you here as well, Robert. Thanks for connecting in. We've got Harry. Hey, Alicia and Mark, good to see you. Thanks for connecting in, Harry. And you'll see this isn't the same as most YouTube channels, right? Like, this is an interactive. We love to build community, and we love to acknowledge the people that take time to watch. We know in some places, 10 a.m. Mountain Time could be midnight or later in other areas in the world. So we really appreciate the time that you guys take to connect in. Now, I'll let everybody know a couple things. One, we don't answer every question. We don't. We try to focus on the questions that are going to be of the most benefit to the most viewers. And if your question is really super specific, in those circumstances, we usually tell people to slide over and book a consult. And that's this, click on the Speak to a Lawyer button. It's super easy. You can schedule, pick a time, pay, everything all right in one shot. And so don't hesitate to do that. And if you're wondering what other people's experiences are, you can just check on the little Google rating and just see what the reviews are. But if your question is too specific, that may be why we're not answering it. For example, how do I immigrate to Canada? Well, that's a consult. And that's those types of strategic individual plans are something we love to do with our clients. And the earlier you can talk to us, the absolute better, because then we have time to give you some advice and some direction, some legal advice and direction that you can actually rely upon related to your specific situation. All right, let's see. Oh, Sam Dawson. Hey, Sam, good to see you. Let's see who else we have here. Let's see. Marco says, hey, Mark, your EE course is great. However, the mastering your document section does not address the letter of employment. What is the difference between this, the offer and the record? Okay, so this is a good one to answer right now. So basically what's happened is when they developed Express Entry back in 2015, they treated FSW applications a little bit different than CEC. So The document checklist that's generated when you have Canadian work experience is a little bit different than the document checklist that's generated when you're just proving foreign work experience. So sometimes when people have, say, job offers in Canada, or they have Canadian work experience, sometimes we see, and often it is when there's a job offer, but the document checklist will pull up the separate field for you to upload a letter of employment. And for all intents and purposes, if you click on that little radio button, you'll see it's really just a reference letter. And so what I've started and what I've done since the beginning of time is if I have an offer of employment from the employer and a reference letter, I just include them both in that section as well as the other sections. So I don't even take any chances. I just include them both in there. But you'll see when you go through the document checklist, what they're asking for is really very similar to a record of employment, or a reference letter. So they're almost the same, but usually it's triggered when you also have an offer of employment that you're claiming points for. And so I just put it all in. I put it all in. Any thoughts on that,
Mark,
Alicia?
yeah, I'd add to that just be really careful to make sure you're properly following those offer of employment, arranged employment. So if you've claimed, or if you're getting 50 points, if you said, yes, I have a job offer, be very, very, very careful that when you're uploading that letter, it needs to say not only, yes, we confirm this person has been working for us. If you are on an LMIA exempt work permit, you've got to show in that letter that you have been working there already for 1 year in that occupation for that employer, and that your employer intends to employ you for another year after you get PR. So take a look at my article on our website on the blog. I also did a whole explainer video about arranged employment and when you can properly claim arranged employment points. But be very careful that when you're uploading that offer of arranged employment to get those 50 points, that letter's got to be very specific. If it's not an LMIA-based work permit, then you've got to show prior employment with that same company on a valid work permit that's employer-specific for a year, plus that they are going to continue to employ you for another year.
Yeah.
So take a look at this video.
Yeah, if you haven't checked this one out, this is a great one, a great little explainer video, and Alicia just goes to great length, discussing all the ins and outs, and so that you can truly understand what constitutes an offer of employment. Because we've had tons of consults with people who have, basically gone through the process and received an ITA. And then after talking to us, realized that their job offer wasn't really a job offer as defined by the express entry process. So there's nothing worse than celebrating your ITA and then realizing, oh, those 50 points I was awarded, I actually don't qualify for them. All right, let's see. We've got a couple other ones. Oh, we've got Wada from Sudan. Great to have you connecting in. Let's see who else we have here. I think we're just about to the tail end. Okay. Emmanuel says, hey, Mark and Alicia, joining in from Winnipeg for my PR, and I'm grateful for the insight and guidance you guys provide. You're very, very welcome, Emmanuel. Then we've got Felix. Great to connect with you, Felix. And let's see here as we get to the tail end, and then we'll go back up and we'll definitely, anyone who's asking questions, we'll definitely work through those. Hanan's got some questions, and please suggest. Okay, we'll check out your question, Hanan. I'm looking for the smaller ones that have people indicating where they're from. Okay, so let's jump in now and let's start diving in. And remember, keep your questions very succinct. That makes it easier for me to choose them. And then we'll do our best. And here's another thing I'll tell you guys. In some cases, when we are answering the question, it will be specific, but we can take your specific question and kind of generalize it so it benefits more people. But once again, if you hear that little bell, that means it's a little bit too specific, and we recommend you slide over and book a consult. And just to let everybody know as well, if you're an individual who says, look, I just want to hire someone to help me, we can do that. So just head over to our site. Everything starts with a consult, and we can help you that way. Okay, let's start with Avalon. So Avalon says, would applying for a U.S. diversity visa, permanent residence pathway in the U.S., okay, we don't know U.S. immigration, but we're assuming you're applying for permanent residence in the U.S., and Canadian citizenship at the same time, will it cause any issues to the Canadian citizenship application? So if someone is applying for permanent resident status in the U.S. at the same time they're applying for Canadian citizenship, could that be an issue?
So, I mean, basically, as long as, so Canada recognizes dual nationality or triple nationality, depending on your original country of nationality and how far you get along into the US process. But basically, you've got to meet the residency requirement and the knowledge test and the language test to meet Canadian citizenship requirements for eligibility. So as long as you can say that, yes, I have been properly residing in Canada as a permanent resident and I've accumulated 1,095 days of permanent residency in Canada, then you can apply for citizenship. Where it sometimes becomes a problem, what I've noticed anyways, specifically for the US, is that some people are on certain status in the US that requires them to go back to the US often in order to be able to renew their status there. And sometimes they will lose that if they leave. And so it's not necessarily a problem on the Canadian side, but be very careful to consult with a US immigration attorney because you may not want to lose your US ability to work or to enter into the country again.
Exactly. All right. I want to pull this one up here. Let's just see here. Okay, so this one's from Joyful Journeys. Do we need to show only our COPR and the passport with the visa stamp when we arrive at the airport for the first time as a permanent resident to apply?
Well, Joyful, I tend to want to make sure that all the bases are covered. So if it were me, I would make sure that I had the source documentation for whatever kind of PR application that I had, so that if the officer asks me questions about those things, I could produce the documents, I could show that I meet the requirements. So if you came under express entry, make sure that you do have a copy of, the employer letter of reference, you've got a copy of your degree or your transcripts, you can speak to any questions the officer may have. It's unusual for them to ask you things about that, but it's possible, right? So at that final landing interview, that's when the rubber hits the road. That's when you actually become a permanent resident. The key thing that's really important also is if anything in your family composition has changed. If you have had the birth of a child, you must bring the birth certificate and the passport for your child. If there's been a divorce or a marriage, you have to be so careful because if you land as a permanent resident and you have failed to disclose family members and those family members have not been medically examined, they are considered under Section 117 sub 9 sub D of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations not to be a member of your family, and you can never turn around and sponsor them. So be careful about changes in your family composition, especially.
You bet. I had another follow-up here. Let's see if I can find it here from Sheeta. Sheeta reminded me on the permanent residence. It was a CEC inland that was previously refused. And oh my goodness, you guys. Like Alicia and I see this all the time. And it's not the big things that get your express entry applications rejected. It's the little things. And so Sheeta had an inland CEC previously refused, but this application took just about 4 months to be approved. So we basically were able to go in, and Sheeta was fortunate, one of the rare individuals who was actually able to get another ITA and then resubmit. And boy, Alicia, we do a ton of this. For whatever reason, well, I know the reasons because everybody says it's so easy, you can do it yourself. People rarely contact us until after something has gone sideways. And then they retain us so that they can sleep at night and know that this time it's going to be submitted as a complete application and have a great chance of actually getting approved. So, Sheeta, big shout out to you. Thank you so much for giving us that feedback. And we just love when people jump back in and chat with us. Okay, here's a good one. This one's from Patel. Patel says, after COPR for PR through express entry, so confirmation of permanent residence, can an applicant remove funds from the bank account shown in proof of funds and then replenish it at the time of landing in Canada? So what are your thoughts on that with funds going up and down? And usually people ask this question after they filed their EAPR, can they pull the funds out? When you've got your COPR, I have to assume there's not a lot of time before you actually make the decision to come to Canada. But Alicia, what do you advise your clients?
Yeah. So this is one of the things, like, Joyful was saying, what do we bring to the port of entry? If you happen to be an outside Canada federal skilled worker work experience category, then you have to show those proof of funds. And Proof of funds is one of the requirements for eligibility. And if you no longer meet that eligibility requirement, so if the officer were to say, hey, show me that you actually have over 13,000, whatever, $400, depending on how many applicants you have in your application, and you can't show it, or you can show that, oh, well, there was a month where I had to pull out all that money and then but it's okay, I put it back in. There's a risk because the requirements say you have to be able to show that you have that accessible and that it's been in your bank account for the last 6 months. So, try not to play around with that. Try to make sure that that money stays in your account. You don't touch it. It's there, and it's there when you land as well.
All right, next question here. Rowan says, hey, Mark and Alicia, if we apply for a student visa, do you think Duolingo is enough to persuade an officer to determine English proficiency? So
So study permits.
applying for a study permit, I'll give you my response. No, Rowan. I'm sure that there may come a day when Duolingo scores are enough to convince. And I like Duolingo personally when I'm trying to learn different languages. I like it. I think it's a great system. But for immigration purposes, there are only really, I guess now, 3 English language proficiency tests. I think Pearson has started. I can't remember if Pearson is actually active now, but there's the IELTS and obviously the Canadian CELPIP test that typically we would always have our clients. And personally, I would never, take the chance of submitting a Duolingo test. So.
And it does depend, right? Because some of the universities don't require an IELTS or a
Mhm.
CELPIP, and so they will use the Duolingo. So it does depend on the university. So if the university has accepted you, you've got your letter of acceptance, you can prove you have a strong application. I would hope that you have strong undergrad marks or marks from your previous degree or diploma so that you can show that you're going to be a successful candidate. English tends to be a pretty strong indicator for officers in terms of how successful you're likely going to be in your study permit program. So if you have low scores, really make sure in your language to try to do your best to get those scores as high as possible.
All right. Next question. This one is from Manpreet. Good morning. I applied for my husband's spousal open work permit on June 21st. No update yet. Is it normal or is it just me? And I'm going to answer just one of these. We'll answer just one of these. Okay, you go ahead and answer this one, Alicia, and then we'll apply that same response to any other question about immigration processing.
Yeah, so Manpreet, it's so hard to tell what's going on with processing times other than going to the website and looking up IRCC processing times and going down through the drop-down list and seeing what category of work permit, where was the person applying from, and that's going to give you an estimate of the processing times. Other sources of information, of course, is kind of trying to do crowdsourcing and trying to figure out how long is it generally taking right now. But these are very fluctuating timeframes, and it really depends on which officer and which day you submitted your application and where it is in the queue, and if there's any other complicating factors about your application as well.
Yeah. Hanan asks a question that we get a lot about too. So people often reach out to us when their visa applications are rejected. So Hanan says, I'm a textile exporter in Pakistan, already exporting to Canada, but got a business visa, and we'll assume it's a business visitor visa probably. Refuse a 4th time with objections that I'll not return back. And this is one of the factors that they look at, Hanan. And so I don't know if you retained someone to help you file that application, or if you did it yourself, or to what extent you've provided the evidence. But officers can't just refuse an application because they don't like you, but they can refuse if they feel that you haven't provided sufficient evidence to convince them of these bona fides. And so we often tell people in your situation, Hanan, to we ring the bell, we tell them to book a consult, and then we can look into your situation in detail and try to sort out what went wrong, and if there are some things that can be done on a subsequent application to strengthen or resolve the concerns that an officer has. But yeah, it's tough. Each refusal that you get, it becomes more difficult the next time. So you really have to have your best kick at the can, as we say, right on that first application. But we've had situations where, for example, study permit was refused 5 times, and then we went through, corrected it, resubmitted, and in some cases it was approved. In others, we had to file a leave application for judicial review, and we were successful in those circumstances. But there's never a guarantee. that IRCC will approve your visa. But often if you've put a very strong case together, then an officer doesn't have grounds to reject the application, reasonably reject that application. Okay, let's see here. I'm just going to pull up a couple more. Grajant says, good morning, Mark. I applied for CEC on July 16th, still waiting for biometric letter. Any guess how long it would take? Man, he caught me. Processing times. It's all over the map, you guys. Sometimes it comes quick. Sometimes it takes longer. July, you've got August, September, 2 months. You're probably still in that range, although we know CEC applications, I think processing right now, Alicia, is around, I think it's at 6 months, isn't it? I think everything is kind of
It
balanced
was
out at 6 months.
5 last
Was it
time I
5?
checked. Yeah.
Okay. Let's just check the processing times. We'll slide over here and let's pull them up. And you can do this yourself, IRCC processing times. And then, because really, I don't care, I don't pay too much attention about how long it takes to advance through the various stages. It just doesn't, it's not helpful to me. All I care about is, what are the processing times? And yeah, they're 5 months right now. And because an application, once it lands on an officer's actual desk or they pull it up, they can process one of these express entry applications in a few hours or even faster. So you could jump from not receiving your biometrics to receiving the biometrics and almost getting a passport request or the eCoper portal invitation. So keep that in mind. Okay. Arjun says, hey, Mark, thanks for your team's help with my work permit application back in December, March. I finally caught the right time of the live stream. Cheers from Halifax. Hey, Arjun, it's great to connect with you. Yeah, that was a little bit of a battle, wasn't it? Well, we're really grateful that worked out. And once again, just love to have past clients connect in. So thanks so much for tuning in. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Okay, Sam says, when completing a statutory declaration of common law form, do we put the current date as the to date? Example, from 2013, June 1st to 2023, October 4th. So that's when I think what they're saying is when they sign the stat dec of common law unions, or they just use the current date as the to date?
Yeah, I mean, you'd sign it on the date that you're signing it, notarizing it in front of a notary public. But this is one of the questions that becomes very complicated for people when they're looking at the actual PR portal itself, because a lot of people get this wrong. When you look at your common law period of cohabitation, you actually have to say the beginning of your common law period of cohabitation is after you've met the 1 year. And so be careful with that. Like sometimes the statutory declaration form is also going to ask you, what is your period of cohabitation? On the stat dec, you say, here's when we started living together and here's when we ended living together. But when you're doing the PR portal, it's going to say, when were you common law partners? And the date that you became common law partners is a year after you started living together. So anyways, make sure that you're doing that stat dec correctly, that you say, here's when we moved in, here's when we're still together now. And then when you look at your application itself, you can do a little letter of explanation and put that on there properly.
You bet. All right, LS Mobile says, I wanted to submit my visitor visa and I got refused. How can I contact you? Lots of love. Thank you. So for anyone, I'll just reiterate again, all you have to do, and the links are all in the description of this live stream below. You can go and click on book a consult and it'll take you here to our website. In some cases, it'll take you directly to our consult booking page. And all you need to just go here, click on the link and it'll take you to where the time that's available for you to book your consultation. And you can see Alicia here. If we go to today, she's filled up. Tomorrow, at least I don't think you have any spots today. Tomorrow, 9 and 3 o'clock. She got 2 appointments tomorrow, and all you have to do is just click on that, and then it will pull up the payment portal, and then it'll initiate the process for booking a consult. So it's really quite straightforward and easy, no matter what time zone you're in, and it'll tell you exactly when you book the consult what time your consult would be based on your local time. So that's one of the good things about it. So yeah, we highly recommend that you go down that path, and then we can take a look and see if there's something that we can do to assist you. Okay. Okay. Here's a great question. This is from Malusin, And Lucen says, what happens if I submit a work permit renewal application with an expiring passport? Will the application be rejected or processing will stall until I submit the new renewed passport? This is a great
All
question.
right. So it is a great question, and it's one that I always ask, and it's one that you should ask as one of your first questions too, is when is my passport expiring? Because keep in mind, immigration is never going to give you a work permit that's valid for longer than your passport. So if your passport is expiring next month and you're applying for a work permit, they're only going to give you a work permit that's valid until next month. So if you want a work permit that's valid for longer, make sure that you go and get a new passport and have that new passport number and a scan of that bio page submitted as part of the application. Sometimes, people didn't realize this and there's a little bit of a panic when they try to get that new passport. Do your best to try to get the new passport and then upload it via a web form, the new web form, to add that document and say, look, I was able to get a new passport. Here's my new passport. Please issue the work permit valid to the new passport validity. But if you don't catch them in time, you might be having to do 2 work permit applications. And hopefully it's not an LMIA, because normally the LMIA is used up as soon as you've done the one application. So be careful with that.
Yes. All right. Omkar says, I'm working for an employer A on a postgrad, and if I receive an LMIA approval job offer, an LMIA approved job offer from employer B, can I claim 50 CRS points? Also, is it okay if I don't work for employer B and just claim 50 points? Okay, we got a bunch of different things going on here.
Okay, so Omkar, you need to make sure that you're not misrepresenting, right? That you're telling the truth in your application. So absolutely, it is never okay that you don't work for employer B and you just claim the 50 points. That's not going to fly. That's just dishonest. If, however, you're working for employer A on a postgrad work permit, you can't claim arranged employment points, right? Because it's an open work permit, it's not employer specific. If you get an LMIA approved job offer from employer B and you actually get a work permit that is employer specific for that worker, for that employer that did the LMIA for you, when you start working on that work permit, you could claim arranged employment points, but only if your employer also says they intend to employ you for another year after you get PR. And all of that has to be legit.
Here's another similar question from Julian. If you're on an open work permit and you're applying for a closed work permit, can you still work on the open work permit until you receive the closed permit?
Yes, so if you are in Canada, you have an open work permit, it's still valid. You've applied for that closed work permit. You can still continue to work on that open work permit until you get the closed work permit. There is an interim temporary public policy. Like, I don't know if you're doing the closed work permit in order to try to start accumulating points or to try to start accumulating hours towards Canadian experience points under a closed work permit. So there is a temporary public policy that will allow you to ask for interim authorization to work for a specific employer on an LMIA based or a closed work permit in the meantime. But it is an interesting question about whether that would count, because that work permit hasn't actually been issued yet. So if your open work permit is still valid, you can still work on the open work permit.
Exactly. All right. This one is from Hari, and he says, my current postgrad work permit is expiring December 17th, and I have applied for an extension on September 14th and waiting for an update from IRCC. In the meantime, can I apply, or sorry, can I leave Canada and enter back before my work permit expires?
So there's actually a temporary public policy on this for PGWP, and it is going to expire in December of this year. Theoretically, they say that you can, but this is always a practical matter of being very careful that you're satisfying that officer that you have not worked without authorization, that you didn't study without authorization, that everything in your applications were perfect, that there was no misrepresentation, and that you get back before that expiry on the postgrad work permit. So, just there's always risk if you leave Canada and you try to come back in, especially if you don't have your new document. And of course, if you leave Canada, you no longer have implied status to work, right? You have lost your implied status to continue to work, and you don't know when that new document is going to be issued, or maybe if something happened to it, right? If it fell into the void and it's not getting processed, you might have lost your ability to work in Canada, which is a big deal.
Yes. And when you go to the IRCC website, sometimes there's little snippets, but they never cover the whole picture. And this is why
Mhm.
we always advise people, we click the bell and say book a consult, because even this can be misleading. But you can see this one, they're waiting for the postgrad to come, the first one. Can I travel outside Canada and come back with my student visa? Which is, lots of times people, they do want to go home and spend some time with their family. And it says you can leave and return as long as your visa ETA is still valid. Your permit, study, or work is not a visa and doesn't allow you to travel back to Canada. So this obviously is the separate, visa in your passport or ETA linked to your passport. And if the visa or ETA is expired, you have to get a new one before you return. And we've had many cases where people have consulted us, book consults, especially during the pandemic when they were stuck and processing of the visas was taking a long time. And then what happens is their postgrad work permit gets approved, and then it starts getting burned up while they're away, and they can't come back into Canada to actually start working and get the Canadian work experience. So we really discourage people from traveling unless they have their documents all valid and good to go, just because there's too much uncertainty, and you just don't want to take a chance. You just don't.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right, Manpreet says, I've submitted my H1B Canada open work permit on the 16th of July and biometrics completed on August the 2nd, but so far I've not seen any updates. Manpreet, the H1Bs, they don't post anything about these things. And when the 150, 60 people that went through my course, the vast majority of them already have their work permits. They tended to get them submitted first, and literally first in, first out is kind of how they're working through this. And I'll be honest, you guys, when all these other lines of business are all just facing horrible processing delays, you H-1Bers aren't necessarily a top priority anymore. The minister who created the program has moved on to a different portfolio. The new minister, Mark Miller, he hasn't said anything about the H-1Bs. He hasn't really spoken about it at all. And it seemed like Minister Fraser was the real driver behind that program before he switched portfolios. So it may be that the officers that are processing the H-1Bs their numbers have been reduced, and so there just aren't as many to process. And so it's not surprising. July, August, September, just into October, 2 and a little bit change months. Yeah, it's entirely normal for that to be the way it is.
And I will jump in here too, Mark, because there was an
Mhm.
internal report and they're talking about overhauling IRCC's lines of business and how
Yeah.
they're going to redistribute things. And there was even, mentioning about updating or completely overhauling the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act itself. It's been 20 years. It's maybe
It
about
has.
time that they're going to start looking about that again. So we might be getting an entirely new act, but for sure they know that their lines of business, they know the system is under huge strain and they're
Yeah.
looking at redistributing things. So that is happening, basically rolling out as we speak. So we'll have to see how that develops. I did want to say, Mark, I had an interesting
Mhm.
consult with somebody on an H1B this week. And my concern on H1B specifically is because people don't have the option of going back to the US usually once they leave after that H1B. They're kind of stuck in Canada and they're putting their eggs in the basket of making sure that they look for Canadian permanent residency. My concern was I was talking to this individual about pathways to PR, and somehow it came out that their child had a serious medical condition,
Ah,
a very serious medical condition. And the interesting thing is that's not necessarily a question that's even asked as part of this H1B, especially if the child was not applying for a study permit because they were, under school age. And I told this person, look, like you really need to look into excessive demand and medical inadmissibility. And that might tank your dreams at becoming a permanent resident in Canada. And I want you to know that before you move to Canada and put all your eggs in that basket. Because unfortunately, because of the crazy H1B application process, these basic things were not filled out for accompanying family members. And be very careful about that if you have accompanying family members who have serious medical conditions.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And this is another classic example of where booking a consult, sometimes you have a certain set of questions that you're asking us. But when we review your history, we review your circumstances, we see the questions you're asking us, other issues pop up in our minds. And as lawyers, we are experts in issue spotting and trying to identify problems. And okay, let me rephrase experts. We are pretty good at spotting issues, and so you may not even realize that there are problems with the approach you're taking or the path you're looking to follow. There are hidden landmines that you're just not aware of, and they come up in our consultations. And so understand, when you come, you may have a certain set of questions that you want us to answer, which absolutely we do. But very often we'll give you strategic advice on whether the pathway you're looking at is even feasible, and maybe there's some others that you hadn't even considered. So those are some of the advantages of actually booking a consult. All right, let's see what is next. Okay, this question is from Arjun. It's a two-pointer. He says, I'm working full-time, 40 hours a week in a union job, I think is really what this is. In a union job, not in a non-union organization. Not in a non-union, okay. Would there be any additional difference to process, additional different process when applying for PR compared to people in normal corporate jobs? I think this is a unionized environment. And then the follow-up question is also, as a post-grad work permit holder, will there be any issue if I get employed in the second job while already working for the first? So what are your thoughts on this one here about just unionized environments, Alicia? Any issues with that in the context of applying for PR?
Yeah, Arjun, and we're trying to figure out if you mean university or
Yeah.
unionized. So those are two different things. If you mean union, then normally there's different unions in terms of how you will be paid under a collective bargaining agreement. And so the wages are set specifically by the union and by the agreement under the collective bargaining agreement. So normally you would just disclose that as these are the wages and it's a unionized position. The corporation would normally be writing you still your letter of employment and confirming the terms of your work. So that would normally, it's pretty similar to being employed by any other company that doesn't have unionized wages. If you're saying that this is a university position, then I've worked with a number of people who were on postdoctoral fellowships or who were doing TAs or research assistant positions. And sometimes one of the issues that comes up with working for a university is who is the employer, because sometimes if you're paid through a research grant or a different employer, you actually have to enter that as two different employment periods. And you also have to be careful if you are doing university work and it's research work, is there a gap in employment and are you properly meeting the number of hours per week depending on how many weeks you've worked in that role? So I'm not sure if you mean unionized or university, but those are my thoughts.
Yes. Okay. Next question. Okay, this is an interesting one. This is from Kumar. I'm on a postgrad and got a high wage LMIA. Do I need to apply for an LMIA work permit before claiming points, or can I directly claim points with a high wage LMIA?
Okay, so Kumar, this is a good question. No, you absolutely cannot claim points with just the LMIA. So the LMIA is the employer's application. It goes to Service Canada, and they would have to name you as a worker on that LMIA. Then you have to apply for the work permit, and you can't claim points for arranged employment until you can actually prove that you have an employer-specific work permit. So you actually have to have that work permit to be able to properly claim the points.
All right, here's another one in terms of job offers. Does employee on record, I'm not quite sure what that concept is, EOR, job offers work for knock code 00013, senior manager for 200 points. I'm a director of my company in India and I want to move to Canada on an EOR via staffing company. So I think this is the difference, is contract for services versus contract of services. And so the staffing company is maybe placing, I guess, Shubham in with a separate company. And so this is quite complex. And I'm right off the bat, I'm going to click on here, Shubham, and say you need to book a consult before you make a decision to do something like this. Because anytime you have a third party in the middle, it can complicate things, especially if you're trying to say that you're a senior manager working in a company and you're really kind of a contracted senior manager versus employed directly. Any other thoughts, Alicia, on that one?
Yeah, just be really careful, because normally you have to be employed by the Canadian entity who's giving you that job offer. And if you're not actually employed by them, that's going to cause a problem.
Okay. This one's from Wada says, is the ECA report from MCC acceptable even if you are not practicing physician? Well, the reality is the educational credential assessments are assessing your education. And if MCC issues you, the Medical Council of Canada, issues you an educational credential assessment saying that your education is equivalent to that of a physician in Canada, then you can claim those points. I don't know if there's any specific restrictions, Alicia, if someone isn't actually practicing as a physician right now, and if that plays into the MCC assessment, I can't speak to that. Maybe it does, but if MCC issues you an ECA and that there's equivalency, you can claim it for the purposes of permanent residence. I don't see any reason why you couldn't.
Yeah, I think if you're properly claiming your primary occupation and you're properly putting in your work experience and it's clear that you're no longer practicing as a physician, then I don't see a problem with properly evaluating your education.
Yeah. Himanshu says, can a person legally work in 2 different countries, one remotely, and claim the experience from both the countries?
Ah, so you can't claim experience over 30 hours in any
Mm-hmm.
given week. This is the problem. So if you are working, let's say, the first week of October, you could claim that as Canadian work experience if you're working in Canada for the first week of October. Theoretically, it might be possible for you to claim it as foreign work experience if you meet all the requirements and you're not breaking any, let's say you're working in US, you're abiding by US employment requirements and you can show that you've worked that job in the US. But the problem under IRCC's Express Entry program is you cannot claim more than 30 hours in any given week. So you can't get credit for both the jobs outside Canada and the job inside Canada, or the job in 2 different countries on the same week.
All right, next question is the 2-parter. Fabrice says, hey, Mark and Alicia, tuning in from Montreal. For a foreign worker on a temporary work permit in Ontario, need to provide proof of funds or just the employment reference letter? For a foreign worker on a temporary work permit in Ontario, need to provide proof of funds or just the employment reference. I think this is probably express entry, Alicia. If the proof of funds is needed, do they need to provide information from all their bank accounts? Yes. And all over the world, or just from the Canadian Institute they are using to show proof of funds? Okay, so maybe I'll tackle this one. For a foreign worker on a temporary work permit, if they're eligible under the Canadian Experience class, Fabrice, then, and they're drawn under the Canadian Experience class, then no, proof of funds are not required. But if they're not, and they're through the Federal Skilled Worker Program, or I guess I should say, if they have either CEC or if they have a valid job offer. So if it's an employer specific and it meets the requirements of the blog post that Alicia had indicated that we talked about earlier, employer specific work permit, either an LMIA based supporting it, or they've worked for a year for the company in Canada and they're at least a tier 3 or higher. Those factors, if they meet the definition of what a job offer is, then they don't need funds, but otherwise they would. So they would need to provide proof of funds. And then do you want to answer the second one here about do they need to include just their bank that they're using here in Canada or all over?
Yeah. So, I mean, you need to make sure that you're proving that you meet the settlement fund requirements if you have to meet the settlement fund requirements. And so, if that's the case, then it's going to say one or more financial institutions where you can prove that amount. So, depending on your family members, if you can prove it all through one account, then you can show all the assets and liabilities at that bank. But be careful that you've not put all of your assets in one bank and all your liabilities in another bank, because then that's not going to be honest. And
Yes.
Fabrice, I would just also mention, if you're tuning in from Montreal, that's great. Shout out to Montreal. My brother lives in Montreal, but be very careful, because if you're looking at express entry, then of course you've got to show an intent not to live in Quebec. So anywhere other than Quebec, and make sure that you're actively going to be living in a different province.
Yeah. Here's another one that we see quite a bit, Alicia, especially people that come in through intercompany transfers or things like that. I'm working in Alberta, but my knock code in the job offer doesn't match with my primary express entry knock. and thus I'm unable to apply for an accelerated tech pathway. Is there still a way to apply for a tech pathway? And this is very specific. And once again, I'm just going to ring the bell. Himanshu, and just encourage you to book a consult so that we can dig in a little bit deeper and see exactly what's going on here. But Alicia, I don't know if you had any any other thoughts, because, at the end of the day, it is what it is. And we need to assess your whole situation to see what other possibilities might exist.
You want to be really careful that you're not trying to fudge things, that you're not trying to shoehorn your knock into something that it isn't in order to be able to apply for accelerated tech. Because at the end of the day, your employer has had to either do an offer of employment through the employer portal, through the IMP program, the International Mobility Program, or they had to do an LMIA under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. And either way, they had to say what your knock is, what your job duties are, what your rate of pay is. And if your work permit is employer specific and occupation specific, you can't be doing a job different than what's on your work permit. And so definitely you're going to be running into issues if the knock code on your job offer is different than your primary express entry knock, unless you have a mechanism of getting a new work permit under the new job offer. But even then, it's complicated, and please talk to us.
Yes. All right. Marco says, I've been thinking for a while, will the consult fee be counted towards a retention for your express entry services fee? And I guess I'll answer this one. Sometimes yes, Marco. Sometimes no. And so it depends upon how things unfold in the course of the consult. And often when I'm assisting people and they're retaining us for express entry, I do credit the consult fee towards the flat fee for express entry. But as a firm, we don't have a firm policy on it at this stage. So it just comes down to, the lawyer who you have your consult with. What do you do with those, Alicia? Do you credit the consult fee?
It really depends how complicated your situation is,
Yeah.
and whether we're able to address what's going on as part of that consult that really helps us start working on the express entry, or whether
Mm-hmm.
there was a whole bunch of stuff that we needed to discuss to even figure out if you could get to express entry, and then really we need to start from ground zero on the express entry. It also depends on when you might be eligible for express entry. Some people, they're not going to be eligible for maybe 6 months and a year or something. And we love to talk to you right from the beginning to sort that out, to make sure that you have the best strategic advice possible. So it depends.
Yes. And that's Alicia brought up another point. If someone retains us within a week of booking the consult, that's the circumstances where I will credit the consult fee. But like Alicia said, lots can change in 6 months, where basically all of the things that we discussed in the original consultation, we're basically rebuilding the case right from scratch. So that's one of the factors that we also add in. Okay, Camby's World. This is one I'm trying to look here. What day? I don't know if we actually settled on a day for us to do this. It's not this week, anyways. But basically, what's happening here is we have our category-based draws, and there are unique questions that relate to some of the categories. And so we've decided to start a series of master classes that are focused specifically to the category-based draws and individuals that are drawn or received ITAs through that category. And this is one of the exact examples, although I think if you answered the questions truthfully, you probably wouldn't be able to enter a profile in the pool. But Camby says, in transport category, knock of pilots and mariners are on a rotational based contract due to stringent international labor laws. So 6 months on, 6 months off. Will the visa office reject all these cases if the work experience is not continuous and full time? And Alicia, this is kind of the question, and every I think every situation is a little bit different, can be, and once again, this is something we'd cover in the master class, and I think it's October 11th is when we're going to do that. So next week is when we're going to do the transport master class. So we'll make sure that we get that up. I'm not sure if the cart is open for that. We haven't been promoting that as heavily. So we'll see. I might push it. We'll see. We might push it another couple weeks just to give a few more time for people to connect in, join the community, start posting their questions, and just kind of build a good critical mass of questions. And then we'll do the master class. But yeah, this is, Alicia, like in my view right now, unless you can prove that you're continuously being employed, I think it's going to be tough to meet the minimum entry criteria. So what are your thoughts on Camby's question?
Yeah, and Canby, keep in mind that when they started targeted draws, they clearly said, look, you have to meet the minimum eligibility requirements under either CEC or FSW.
Yeah,
And then we look at whether you have the 6 months in a transport occupation. So if you're not able to meet that minimum eligibility for 1 year continuous employment for outside Canada FSW or 1 year equivalent, so you're putting together over a period of 2 years, you've got at least 52 weeks of full-time, 30 hours per week, full-time work experience, then you probably have an issue.
exactly. All right. Well, we have hit the 11 o'clock mark, Alicia. And we've got just a couple more here. Jatin says, when are STEM draws coming? Waiting for them for a couple of months now. Any thoughts on when the STEM draws are coming?
Well, theoretically, there should maybe be another STEM draw, but what we don't know is how many people have already been accepted through the express entry stream under one of the no program specified categories who had STEM experience. And those people are going to be making up that 28 to 31%. So if a lot of people have already come in under that, then maybe there won't be that many STEM draws.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it all plays out. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us on another Canada Immigration Live Q&A. We will sign off and we will see you again next week. Remember, if you have questions about anything, you can book a consult with us. We've got our blog post. Subscribe to our podcast on wherever on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Search our YouTube channel for videos. And by all means, if you would like to hire us to help you with any of your express entry applications or study permits or spousal sponsorship or whatever your immigration needs are, just book a consult. We'd be happy to connect with you and work with you. All right. Thanks so much, Alicia. And thanks, everybody. Take care.